Hey everybody, welcome back. Episode 10. Took a little departure from the steampunk tower, which is right here. So I don't know if you can see those lights. The windows are illuminated. Anyway, it doesn't look like much. It looks like a missile silo. But it's coming together. I decided to take a little break from it because I wanted to actually put some steampunk looking parts on there. And all I had was random crap from a bits box. And I feel like that was just going to detract from all the work that I had put in so far, slapping on some, Warhammer 40K junk. But in the meantime, I have this project that I created for you, for your viewing pleasure. And this is a wishing well. And as you can see, it's got some details on there. Anyway, so this is my wishing well, and I wish you well. And let's get on to the video. Thanks. All right, let's make a wishing well. My idea for this wishing well design was to make something that had been designed by a former Elvish resident of the steampunk tower. When I started my project, I made a little template of the size first, and then I transferred that template design to some chipboard. I made 6 pieces because I knew that I was going to make a hexagonal shape on the wishing well. The idea here is that at some point in the past, an elf from somewhere in this steampunk realm stayed at the tower, and while he was staying at the Pilkington's tower, he decided he needed to build a water well or a wishing well, but now it's a wishing well. And it's been part of the landscape of the Pilkington Manor for the last few years. Maybe I'll develop the backstory of this elven guest at some point, but right now, that's all I got. So once I have all of the relief cut out, I've got the 6 panels done, I'll glue those together. And I also have a little more of the Mortimer story to go too. I have some ideas about his girlfriend. So here's the second template that I used. This is for the roof of the wishing well. I decided that I wanted to have a little bit of relief and not just have like rickety boards and aging tiles. I'm just really trying to work with this idea of not making everything grimy and worn out. It's just kind of like everything is grimy and worn out. Can we have something that's not grimy and worn out? So here I am trying to make something that looks, relatively recently made, but still a little bit weathered, but not completely trashed. Now I took the 6 pieces that I had cut out. I had already glued the relief onto the tops at this point, and I took a little bit of painter's tape and used the tape to join them together so that I could put some super glue in the cracks. And I found this worked pretty well once I had all the pieces connected. I just laid it flat on the table and it leveled it out pretty nicely. So I still had a good hexagonal shape, but everything was even. And then I just took my super glue, my CA glue, and poured that into the seams and let it set, and stuck together pretty good. And then I just flipped it over, put a little more CA glue on the inside. But it worked out pretty nicely. It did leave some seams in the top, and I took care of those next once this was all stable and glued together. This is actually a paper mache product. So I took my palette knife, used that to squeeze the paper mache into the seams, and just fill in those openings a little more. Make it look nice. Make it look nice. I find that probably one of my favorite tools is these palette knives. They have so many uses. Use them for mixing paint, for filling in gaps. They're really handy. So if you don't have a set of palette knives, you should get yourself some. They're pretty good. They come in handy. Pretty good. So here I am just filling these in. Once that was dry, it took paint really well too. So I have a little jar where I keep it all in. Spider! So here the seams are filled in, And now I'm going to make the columns using some Sculpey Firm. And here you can see me struggling to squeeze the clay out of this gun, which I later replaced, but this is what I used for now. And so there's a rounded triangle shape that I used to make those columns. And then you're about to see me try to like, so I just couldn't do it. I had to use both hands and squish it down to get that clay to come through. But now I have a new one that you can just turn the handle and it pushes the clay through. So I'll give that a shot in the next project. But once I had a good column of this clay, I just gave it a twist to make it a little more aesthetic. These are the twisted columns before baking. And that worked out pretty good. So baked column, nice and stiff. And then here they are attached to the base of the fountain. My next step was to add a little bit of dimension to the interior of the fountain. And for that I used some foam, building foam. And you can see the relief that I made. This was a little shape that I used to give the rooftop a little more height. Just throwing a little bit of white glue onto those columns before I put the hexagonal roof support on. And I have a little bit of story to why it's a wishing well. The elf who stayed there enchanted it somehow, but no one has ever been able to make a wish come true, so it's a mystery as to why he insisted on calling it a wishing well. For the next part of it, I am creating the brace that's going to hold the crank for the bucket. And I had to make a little wheel and then something to hold on the axle for that wheel. This is me just kind of sketching out the design, trying to figure out what I wanted it to look like. And as with many of my projects, I made a template. I made a template of this. And you'll see me do that in a second. After cutting a few blocks of XPS foam, I used those to glue to the interior of the fountain to make the walls a little bit thicker. My idea was to make them look like stone, or actually marble, and that's why they're kind of a lighter color. They're not quite full on stone gray. I did a stone gray for the base later on. Once I had all the interior walls built up, it was time to put on a little base coat with some gray gesso. I generally prefer not to use black as a base coat for anything. I like a little bit of some sort of color to shine through. I've been a war gamer for decades and I have plenty of experience with putting a black undercoat on things. All it does is deaden any color, which is fine if you're trying to go for like a Warhammer 40K, grimdark, tired, grimy, boring, same old look. I'm kind of done with it. So I just use gray for the most part. Occasionally I use just a white undercoat, even on buildings, actually. A white or a brown or a gray, but never black. It just gives it a little more life. Give it life. It's alive. This is the frame that's going to hold the axle. It's going to raise and lower the bucket to get water out of the well. So once I had this cut out, I made a piece for both sides out of that heavy chipboard. The chipboard that I'm using was packing material, I think, for shipping line. It's fairly heavy and a little bit soft, but it has a good thickness to it, and it's fairly easy to cut. I wish I could find just that by itself, but these are all kind of, this is kind of a sidewalk find. You know, always keep your eyes open for things that you can use laying on the sidewalk. And here I'm transferring that design over, getting it ready. Getting ready. It's just so hard for me to fill empty space and just talk to the fucking wall while I'm doing these projects. I don't know how people do it. How do they just listen to themselves? It's crazy. This is me doing some thing with my hands that you're watching, and I'm going to describe what I'm doing with my hands while you're watching it. And somehow that's a business model. Here we go. All right, frame is done. Time to cut it out. Beautiful man. So I did two pieces, glued those together so it has a little more dimension to it. Doesn't quite look like pieces of cut out chipboard. And here I've got the axle run through this frame. I'm using my small file to widen those holes a little bit so that that axle will turn easily inside those openings. There we go. Lovely fit. So nice. So nice. And there is the crank that I had just attached. I also made that out of cardboard and paper. I think paper is a great material, very flexible. So this is my classic super glue and toothpick technique. So I use, rather than like squirting a ton of super glue onto it and getting it all over the place, like, you know, my fingers. See, very nice. Easy peasy. And then it was on to the painting. I'm not one of those people that hates painting. I actually don't mind it so much. I don't think I'm the best painter, but I'm passable. Got all the basics down, dry brush, wash, the usual. My choice of brighter colors is probably not the norm, but I just prefer that over the oppressive, grim dark. Ugh. Right? I'm not making any custard here. So I'm just adding that a little bit of dry brushing. The dry brushing isn't quite so punched up. It's a little more subtle. Like just enough, like not too little, not too much, hopefully right in the middle. Here I'm using what's called a paint grid to get the extra paint off when I do my dry brushing. People make these elaborate, like, I threw a bunch of models together and made this dry brushing palette thing. Like, yeah, that's what this is for. You just go buy one. But, you know, classy. Those guys are pretty classy. I'm not classy. I'm just practical. Gotta be practical. I'm adding a dry brushing after I did that wash. So my basic technique is just some sort of a base color, which is a little bit on the lighter side, adding a darker wash that still has some of the color of the original base color in it, and then putting a dry brush over that that also has a little bit of the base color on it, and lightening it up with just like an off-white or a parchment color.